So, having discussed about the blood vessels, the nerves and the lymph vessels, now let's discuss about the next important structure, that is muscle. So, I have told you before, the first thing you are going to learn in your anatomy dissection class is about the clavicle or the collarbone. Okay, so when you learn about clavicle, you're going to learn that clavicle has got many muscle attachments or many muscles are attached to the clavicle. So, a muscle usually have two attachments. There can be more than two attachments. Attachment simply means that part of the muscle or the point of contact between the muscle and the bone. Okay, so every muscle will be having two attachment. Means every muscle will be at least connected to two bones. Okay, that may be same bone or different bone, but it will be connected to two different points. So every muscles will be having two points of connections, or we call it attachments. Okay, and these attachments we call it as, one of these attachment is called origin and the second one is called insertion. One of these is called origin and second one is called insertion. How do we define this? That means during a movement, when a muscle contracts, that part of the muscle which remains at rest, or that part of muscle which is fixed, we call it as the origin, and the part of muscle which is mobile, we call it as insertion. Okay, the part of the muscle which stays fixed, we call it as origin, and the part of muscle which is moving or which is mobile, we call it as insertion. I hope it's clear. So just see the definition. When a muscle shortens, either or both of its end may move, but it is usual to consider one end, that means the origin. Okay, the origin to be fixed and the other end, which is called insertion, to be mobile. So I'll show you an example. So I have told you before that the muscle of my arm, the major muscle of my arm is biceps. So and the function of bicep was flexion of elbow, right? The function of biceps was flexion of elbow. So when my biceps contract, okay, what happens is biceps has got its origin near the shoulder joint and insertion near the elbow joint. I'm not specifying the exact points because you won't understand the exact points because you have not learned the anatomy of shoulder and elbow. So just for the time being, understand that the origin of biceps is near the shoulder joint and the insertion of biceps is near the elbow joint. Okay, so what happens when my biceps contract? My origin stays fixed. That means the part of the biceps which stays near the shoulder joint does not move. And the part of biceps which is near the elbow joint, that's the part which is actually moving. So when my muscle contracts, my insertion, the part of the muscle which is called insertion, that's the part which is actually moving. And when my muscle contracts, the insertion moves, and what happens is it pulls my forearm upwards or it pulls my elbow upwards. Okay, it pulls my upper limb upwards, and that's why flexion is happening. Okay, I hope it's clear to everyone. So when as far as biceps is concerned, it has got its origin near the shoulder joint and it has got its insertion near the elbow joint. So we have already said that the part of the muscle which stays fixed is called origin and the part of the muscle which is mobile is called insertion. So the part of biceps near my shoulder joint will be fixed. It does not move. But the part of the muscle near my elbow joint is going to move. So when my muscle contracts, this part is going to be moved. Insertion part is going to be moved and it pulls my arm upwards, or it pulls my elbow upwards. Okay, so that's why flexion occurs. I hope it's pretty clear to everyone with that example. So the part of the muscle which stays fixed is called origin and the part of the muscle which is mobile is called insertion. These two terms are extremely important. These two terms you will be hearing in your first dissection class itself. Okay, so you should not have any doubt what those terms are. Okay. Now, the ends of the muscle fibers are attached to bone through fibrous tissue. Okay, so we have told that the muscle attached to the bone. The point of attachment between muscle and bone is called the attachments. Okay, so how are muscle and bone attached? It is through certain fibrous tissue, and we have name for these fibrous tissues. Okay, so fibrous tissue helps for the attachment of a muscle to a bone. So usually the fibrous tissue forms long inelastic cords known as tendons. So the point of attachment between a muscle and bone, it is usually a fibrous tissue, right? So it can be two types. One, it can be tendon or it can be a aponeurosis. It can be a tendon or it can be aponeurosis. So both tendon and aponeurosis are fibrous tissue, guys. Both tendon and aponeurosis, both of them are fibrous tissue itself. That means both of them helps for the attachment of the muscle to the bone. Then what's the difference? The difference is that the tendons are usually long. That means it will be in length. Okay, and aponeurosis are usually sheets. Okay, so tendon will be like long, slender like this, and aponeurosis will be something like this. It will be more flatter. Okay, and tendons will be more linear. I hope it's clear to everyone. So both of them are fibrous tissue. Both of them are fibrous tissue, which helps in the attachment of a muscle to the bone. Then what the difference is that the tendons are usually long or it's usually linear, and aponeurosis is usually flat. So tendon, you might have already heard the term tendon, but aponeurosis may be something new to you. So understand that both of them are fibrous tissue. Only the shape differs. If it's long, we call it tendon. If it is flat, we call it aponeurosis. Now, in certain situations, bones are formed from muscles. In certain situations, bones are formed from muscles. In certain situations, bones are formed from muscles, and we call these bones as sesamoid bones. We call these bones as sesamoid bones. So, what are sesamoid bones? Sesamoid bones are those bones which is formed from a muscle. Okay, sesamoid bones are those bones which is formed from a muscle. And the classical example of a sesamoid bone is your patella. The classical example, we have many sesamoid bones, but the classical example for a sesamoid bone is a patella. So, what are sesamoid bones? Sesamoid bones are simply those bones which is formed from a muscle. Okay, so I hope it's clear. So, these are the important terms you need to know as far as muscle is concerned. Now, I will show you it in the figure. So, see. So, this is one of my muscle. So, this is one of my muscle. That muscle is called deltoid. So, deltoid is actually a muscle which forms the badge or it provides the contour to my shoulder. Right. So, deltoid is a muscle which lies here. Okay. Deltoid is a muscle which lies here. So, in this figure, I can just mark the deltoid. This is the deltoid. Okay. That one is the deltoid. So, in that figure, that part is called deltoid. I'll zoom it there. So, this is deltoid. So, deltoid has got origin and deltoid has got insertion. So, deltoid has at this point, I'll not specify the points because it's not important at this point. You have to learn it later, but for the time being, we are discussing about what is origin and what is insertion. So, deltoid has got an upper attachment which is called the origin. So, this part of deltoid will be fixed, and the deltoid has got a lower here. The deltoid is attached, or here the deltoid is inserted. So the lower part which is mobile, that is called insertion. So that's about biceps we have already discussed. As far as deltoid is a muscle of the shoulder. So for deltoid, the attachment or origin is a point. It's somewhere here, and insertion is somewhere here. So origin remains fixed and insertion is movable. Now, retinacula is a term which I have not discussed, but just know that retinacula just simply means in anatomy, retinacula simply means band. It simply means band. You know what a band is, right? You have wristbands or not. So, corresponding to wristband, we have retinacula here. That is called flexor retinaculum. Okay, that is called flexor retinaculum. We will learn about it. But for the time being, just remember that there is a term called retinacula, which simply means band. Okay, so that's how the origin and insertion of a muscle is shown. Now, I can show you two types of fibrous tissue. So I have a muscle here. So this muscle is actually called latissimus dorsi. Okay, this muscle is actually called latissimus dorsi. But we have no purpose to learn that the name of that muscle now, but you can see that this muscle it's attached to the vertebral column. This muscle is attached to the vertebral column. So this red color is actually muscle. This is muscle, and this is fibrous tissue. So you know that there are two types of fibrous tissue. Here you can see that it is more kind of flat. Right, it is more kind of flat. It is not linear. It is more kind of flat. Therefore, this fibrous tissue will be called as aponeurosis. Therefore, this fibrous tissue will be called as aponeurosis. I hope it's clear. Okay. Now, again, you can see another muscle here. You can see another muscle here. Right. You can see another muscle. These are called the hamstring group of muscles. I'm just mentioning the names. These are called the hamstring group of muscles. And you can see that the red part of is again the muscle belly, and it is attached to the bone by means of a white fibrous tissue. So this is again fibrous tissue. This is again fibrous tissue. But here the difference is that it is not flat. It is linear. Therefore we call it as tendon. I hope it's clear to everyone. So those are the terms related to muscle. So we know what is an origin. We know what is an insertion. We know the two types of fibrous tissue. That means the two types of attachment of a muscle with a bone. Right, one is called the aponeurosis and second one is called a tendon. I hope it's clear to everyone. Okay, now let's move. I am actually repeating too many times. It's just to make sure that you are getting the point, okay? Because you need, if you have good basics, you will become an excellent doctor. So my purpose here is to build your basics. That's why I'm repeating it again and again. Even if you are not able to understand after multiple repetitions, just play it once again. Okay, just try to listen it once again. I hope you will be definitely able to understand it. Okay, so I hope it's clear to everyone what's origin, what's insertion, what's the aponeurosis, and what's the tendon. Now let's go to the next anatomical structure. Next, so we have discussed about blood vessels, we have discussed about lymph vessels, we have discussed about nerves. Now let's discuss about bones. So as far as a bone is concerned, so we know that the study of bones is called osteology. The study of bones is called osteology. Right? Osteum means bone. So the study of bones is called osteology. So as far as a bone is concerned, what all you should learn? The important things you should learn, which you should learn about bones. One is the side identification. So whenever you get a bone, for example, if you get a humerus, you know that the humerus is my bone which lies in my arm, right? Humerus is the bone which lies in my arm. So whenever I get a bone, I need to say, by looking into the bone, I should be able to say that it's which sided humerus. I should be just by, if somebody gives me a humerus, by looking into that, I should be able to say that it is either right sided humerus or left sided humerus. So you learn certain points to identify or to say whether a bone is on right sided or left sided. Okay, for example, for clavicle also, you need to say whether it's right side or left side. For every bone you learn, you should understand the side of the bone. So side identification is one aspect of bone which you should learn. Okay, you'll come to know how it's done, because certain anatomical aspects will let you know that which sided bone is that. Okay, so that's the first part of a bone. And the second part of a bone is to hold the bone in an anatomical position. So if somebody hands me a clavicle, so during my exam, during our first year examination, during Viva, our examiner will give you a bone. Say that they'll give you a clavicle bone. Okay, so and they'll ask you to hold it in the anatomical position. They'll ask you to hold it in the anatomical position. So I can show that clavicle is a bone that lies like this, right? Clavicle is a bone that's collar bone. It extends from the root of neck towards the shoulder. So I should show the examiner how this clavicle lies in my body. That's called the anatomical position. You cannot hold clavicle like this because it's not the anatomical position. Clavicle lies horizontally. Clavicle lies horizontally. So you have to hold clavicle in its anatomical position. That means how this clavicle lies inside our body, you have to show it to the examiner. So that's the second important point of bones. Okay, now third important points of bone is its attachments. So regarding attachments, we have already discussed. Attachment means the muscles attached to the bone. So clavicle will be having different muscles attachment. So you need to learn which are all the muscles attached to clavicle. Or say any bone. For any bone, you need to know which are the muscles attached to it. Now, some bones will be having certain peculiarities. For example, we have already discussed that patella is a sesamoid bone. So it's a peculiarity of patella. Right? And clavicle, what's the specialty of clavicle? Clavicle is the only long bone that lies horizontally. All other long bones lies vertically, right? All other long bones lies vertically. My humerus, my radius, my ulna, my femur, tibia, and fibula, all those bones lies vertically. Clavicle is the only long bone. It's the only long bone. Don't forget, it's the long bone. Okay. It's the only long bone that lies horizontally. So that's the peculiarity of clavicle. Similarly, you will be having many peculiarities. So you should learn the peculiarities of a bone. Now, regarding ossification. So you have to learn regarding ossification. So what is ossification? Ossification simply means the natural process of bone formation. Ossification simply means the natural process of bone formation. So how a bone is formed. Okay, how a bone is formed. That's called the ossification. So we have certain points on bones which are called ossification centers. Okay, ossification centers are certain points in bone where ossification of the bone begins, or ossification of the hyaline cartilage begins. So the point where ossification begins, those points are called ossification centers. I'm not detailing it much because you are going to learn it. Just now remember these terms, or just now listen to these terms. That means these are all the terms which are going to come across when you enter the medicine field. Right. So as far as bone is concerned, we have to identify the side of the bone. We have to hold the bone in its anatomical position. Okay, that means, for example, humerus. The anatomical position of humerus will be something like this. I cannot hold humerus like this, right? It should be always like this. Okay, now we have the third point of a bone is the attachments, which all muscles are attached to the bone. The fourth point of a bone will be the peculiarities of the bone. That means the specialties. I have mentioned already two examples. Okay, that means that are peculiarities of the bone. The fifth point about bones is the ossification. The fifth point about bones is the ossification. So ossification is the natural process of bone formation, and ossification centers are those points where this ossification begins. Where the ossification begins. Okay, so ossification, it's just the simply ossification means the process of bone formation. I hope it's clear to everyone. Now the skeletal system, I think everybody of you will be knowing this because you have already learned this chapter locomotion. Okay, movement and locomotion you have already learned. So I think all of you might be knowing how our skeletal system is. But just to brief, I'll just quickly brush it up. Okay, just I'll quickly brush it up. This has been our way, right? We have discussed arterial system in short. Okay, I have showed you the important arteries. We have discussed about nerves in short. We have discussed about lymphocytes in short. We have then discussed about the muscles in short. Now we are discussing about bones in short. So we know that we have two types of skeleton. One is called the axial skeleton, and second one is called the appendicular skeleton. You know everything about it, right? Axial skeleton is that part of the bone which forms the trunk, right? The bone in my thorax, the bone in my abdomen, those are called the axial skeleton. And the appendicular skeleton is the bone in my limbs, bone in my upper limb and my lower limb. Bones in my upper limb and lower limb makes the appendicular skeleton. You all know that. And we also know that axial skeleton total has 80 bones and appendicular skeleton totally has 126 bones. Axial skeleton totally has 80 bones and appendicular skeleton totally has 126 bones. So, of this, our skull has total 22 bones. Our skull in total has 22 bones. Okay, of these 22 bones, 14 bones are facial bones. Of these 22 bones, 14 bones are facial bones, and remaining 8 bones, those are called frontal, parietal, temporal, and occipital. All of them are paired, so 4 into 2 becomes 8. So, in my cranium, that means in my proper head, or the part I am showing like this part has total 8 bones, and my face has totally 14 bones. So, totally in my skull, I have got 8 cranial bones and 14 facial bones. 8 cranial bones and 14 facial bones, which makes total 22 bones in my skull. Which makes a total of 22 bones in my skull. I hope it's clear. Now, in here I have got 3 bones. We know that we have malleus, incus, and stapes. We have malleus, incus, and stapes is the smallest bone. So I'll have got malleus, incus, and stapes on the right side and the left side, which makes a total of 6 bones. I hope it's clear. Now I have got 1 bone in my larynx. Okay, I have got 1 more bone near my larynx or in my throat, and that bone is called hyoid bone. That bone is called hyoid bone. So in total, I have got 22 skull bones, of which 8 is cranial bones and 14 is facial bones, and 6 ear ossicles on both sides, and 1 hyoid bone. So altogether they makes 29 bones. So altogether my skull and associated bones make 29 bones. I hope it's clear. Now I'm just brushing it up, guys. I know you guys know this, so I'm just revising it quickly. Now, when I come to my chest or when I come to my thorax, I have got 1 flat bone here. 1 flat bone I have got here. You all know its name. It's called the sternum. It's a single flat bone which lies here. Actually, it has got 3 parts. Okay, manubrium, body, and xiphoid process that you will learn. But for the time being, we have got flat bone in the chest, which is called the sternum. So we have 1 sternum. And we have got ribs. We have got 12 pairs of ribs. So we have got 24 ribs in total. We have 12 pairs of ribs, so we have got 24 ribs in total. So it forms my thoracic cage. So in my thoracic cage, I have 12 pairs of ribs and I have got 1 sternum. So it totally makes 24 plus 1, that is 25. I hope it's clear. Now, regarding my vertebrae, I have got different types of vertebrae. I have got cervical vertebrae, I have got thoracic vertebrae, I have got lumbar vertebrae, then I have got sacrum, and then I have got coccyx. These are the 5 parts of vertebral column. You will learn about it, how many cervical, how many thoracic. I'm not detailing about it, but just now, these are the parts of this vertebral column. Cervical, thoracic, lumbar, sacrum, and coccygeal. Or sacrum and coccyx. Okay. So, altogether, I have got 24. That means 12 pairs of Altogether I have got not pairs. Altogether I have got 24 vertebrae. Altogether I have got cervical, thoracic plus lumbar. It makes 24 vertebrae. Cervical plus thoracic plus lumbar. It makes 24 vertebrae. Then I have got one sacrum and one coccyx. Actually, sacrum and coccyx, it's usually multiple bones. Actually, when we count the vertebra, we will get 33. But it's in infants. In infants, it is 33. When the person becomes adult, few bones fuse to form sacrum, few bones fuse to form coccyx. So from 33, it becomes 26. So from 33, it becomes 26. So I have got 24 vertebrae in the cervical, thoracic, and lumbar area. Then I have got one sacrum and one coccyx. One sacrum and one coccyx. So it altogether it makes 26 bones. Altogether it makes 26 bones. So now in my axial skeleton, I have got 29 skull plus associated bones plus 25 bones in thoracic cage plus 26 bones in vertebral column, which gives me a total of 80 bones. So those are the 80 bones in the axial skeleton. So those are the 80 bones in the axial skeleton. I hope it's clear. Now let's come on to the appendicular skeleton. So we have discussed about the 80 bones in the axial skeleton. We have discussed about the 80 bones in the axial skeleton. Skull contains skull and associated bones. It's totally 29 bones. Then we have 25 bones in the thoracic cage, one sternum plus 12 pairs of ribs. Then we have got 26 pairs in the 26 bones in the vertebrae, of which we have in the cervical, thoracic, and lumbar we have got 24 vertebrae, and then we'll be having one sacrum and one coccyx altogether, which makes 80 bones in the axial skeleton. Now let's discuss about the appendicular skeleton. So appendicular skeleton contains two proper parts. So appendicular skeleton contain two parts. One is the girdles and the second one is limb bones. So appendicular skeleton, we have already know what is appendicular skeleton. Axial skeleton is actually skeleton or the bones of the trunk. Appendicular skeleton actually means appendicular skeleton means the bones of the limbs. But the connection between axial skeleton and appendicular skeleton, we call them the girdle. So what's a girdle? Girdle are the bones which connect the axial skeleton with the appendicular skeleton. Okay, girdles are those bones which connects the axial skeleton with the appendicular skeleton. I hope it's clear. So even though they are connections, we count them with the appendicular skeleton. Okay, we count the girdles with the appendicular skeleton. So where all we need the connections, we have the upper limbs. So this is appendicular skeleton and this is axial skeleton. So here we need a connection, right? This is appendicular skeleton, this is axial skeleton. So here we need a connection, and that connection is called pectoral girdle. That connection is called, so the connection of axial skeleton to appendicular skeleton at the shoulder joint is called the pectoral girdle. Now where do we need connection? This is our lower limb, or this is the appendicular skeleton, and this is my axial skeleton. This is my axial skeleton, right? This is my axial skeleton. So here I need a connection again between axial skeleton and appendicular skeleton. First connection was here, between the axial and the appendicular. That's called pectoral girdle. The second connection is between the axial skeleton here and appendicular skeleton here. So the connection will be somewhere here, and that connection is called the pelvic girdle. That connection is called the pelvic girdle. So we have a pectoral girdle and we have a pelvic girdle. I hope it's clear. So in the pectoral girdle, I have got clavicle and scapula of either side. I have a horizontal bone here called clavicle, and I have a flat bone behind which is called scapula. I have a clavicle, I have a scapula. So two clavicles, two scapulas, which makes 4. So in the pectoral girdle, I have got 4 bones. In the pectoral girdle, I have got 4 bones. Now coming to pelvic girdle. In pelvic girdle, you will only be having one hip bone on either side. Okay, we have 2 hip bones. We have one hip bone here. We have one hip bone here, and we have second hip bone here. Okay, this is my first hip bone. This is my first hip bone, this is my second hip bone, and they fuse at the center, which makes the pubic symphysis. You are familiar with all these terms, I know that. Okay, so we have 2 hip bones. So we have 2 hip bones in the pelvic girdle. So we have 2 hip bones in the pelvic girdle. Okay, now let's come on to the upper limbs. In the upper limbs, I have one humerus here. So the bone of my arm is called humerus. So I have one humerus here, one humerus here. So I have totally 2 humerus. Okay, now I have got one radius. I have told you that the lateral bone of the forearm is called radius and the medial bone of the forearm is called ulna. So I have 2 radius, one on each limb, and 2 ulna, one on each limb. So I have 2 radius and 2 ulna. Right. Now I have carpals. Actually, I have 8 carpals on one side. I have got 8 carpals on one side. So on both sides it will be 16 carpals. Okay, I have 8 carpals on one side, so there will be 16 carpals in total. So the total number of carpals is actually 16 in number. Actually, till now you have just learned that it is called carpals, but in the first year you have to know the name of each carpal. Okay, so there goes a famous mnemonic. I'll just discuss that mnemonic because it's a famous mnemonic. To you know what a mnemonic is? A mnemonic is a term, or it's some few group of words or few sentences which helps you remember things, right? When you enter medical college, one thing you need to know that you have to learn many names, you have to learn many facts. Okay, it's a factual type of subject. MBBS is definitely a factual type of subject. Definitely you have got concepts, but still you have to learn many names, still you have to learn many points, still you have to learn many orders. Okay, so for this we'll use certain mnemonics. So to learn the carpal bones, we have a famous mnemonic, that is, she looks too pretty, try to catch her. Okay, this is the famous mnemonic to learn the carpals. Okay, this is called she looks too pretty, try to catch her. So I don't think anyone will forget this, because the idea conveyed here will be interesting to everyone, right? She looks too pretty, so try to catch her. So what here important is, it's not that the girl is too pretty and we have to focus on that. The point here is we will take the first letter of each word. Okay, we will take the first letter of each word. So S for scaphoid, S for scaphoid, L for lunate, T for triquetral, P for pisiform, T for trapezium, T for trapezoid, C for capitate, and H for hamate. So in your 12th standard, you have just learned that we have got 8 carpals, but in your first year MBBS, you will learn in detail about each of these carpal bones. Okay, in detail about each of these carpal bones. So these carpal bones are called scaphoid, lunate, triquetral, pisiform, trapezium, trapezoid, capitate, and hamate. Okay, so the mnemonic, I just wanted to introduce you to the world of mnemonics. That's why I have showed you this. Okay, so this is how you learn. If you have to learn 8 words together, or if you have to learn 5 words together, we'll try to make some mnemonics, and it will help to make us remember easily. Okay, so the mnemonic for carpals is she looks too pretty, try to catch her. Okay. Now, you don't need to remember those names right now. Okay, guys, you don't need to memorize those bones, names of those bones right now. You will definitely eventually study about it. So, no need to memorize it at this point. Okay, so I have got 8 carpals on one side and 8 carpals on other side. So, which makes total of 16. Now, metacarpals, I have got 5 on each side. Okay, these are my metacarpals. I'll just mark the metacarpals. These are my See, these are my metacarpals. Okay, these are my metacarpals. That means the connection between carpals and phalanx. So I have got 5 metacarpals on each side. So in total, I will be having 10 metacarpals. In total, I will be having 10 metacarpals. And then I have 14 phalanges on each side. Okay, I have 14 phalanx on one side, 14 on other side, which makes a total of 28. You know that each finger contains 3 phalanx, except for the thumb. Thumb contains only 2 phalanx. The rest 4 fingers contains 3 phalanx. So 4 into 3, 12 plus 2. That means 14. So I have 14 phalanx on one side, 14 on the other side, which makes a total of 28. So now let's count. 2 plus 2 plus 2, 6. 6 plus 16, 22. 22 plus 10, 32. 32 plus 28, 60. So in upper limb, on both sides, for one side I will be having 30 bones. The other side I will be having 30 bones. So in total I am going to have 60 bones. Okay, now let's come on to lower limb. Lower limb is synonymous to upper limb. So corresponding to humerus, I will be having femur. So this is my femur bone. This is my femur. So corresponding to humerus, I have femur. So I have 1 femur on each side. So totally I have 2 femur. Okay, now I have got a bone here called patella. You know that patella is an example for sesamoid bone. What was sesamoid bone? Sesamoid bones were those bones which forms from muscle. Sesamoid bones are those bones which is formed from a muscle. So I have 2 patellas. I have 2 patellas. So I have 2 patellas, 1 on each side. Then I have got tibia. I have told you that the medial bone of the limb, the medial bone of the limb. So this bone The medial bone of the limb is called the tibia, and the lateral bone is called the fibula. And the lateral bone, this bone is called the small bone is called the fibula. The medial big bone is called the tibia, and the lateral one is called fibula. So here, this one is tibia, this one is fibula. Okay, this one is tibia, this large one is tibia, this is tibia, and this is fibula. Okay, so I have one tibia on each side and one fibula on each side. So it makes two tibia and two fibula. Makes two tibia and two fibula. Now corresponding to we had 8 carpals on each side, but we only have 7 tarsals on each side. We have 8 carpals on each side, but we have only 7 tarsals on each side, because it's the beauty of human body, guys. It's the beauty of human body. Since we have got an extra bone here, we have got an extra bone called patella here, right? We don't have a bone corresponding to patella in upper limb, right? We don't have a bone corresponding to patella in upper limb. In the upper limb, in the elbow joint, there is no specific bone, but in lower limb, in the knee joint, we have a bone called patella. Okay, so that's the beauty. So since there is an extra bone in lower limb, there is one bone less in the tarsals. Since we had 8 carpals on each side, but we will be only having 7 tarsals on each side to make a total of only 60. So that's the beauty of human body, right? So since I had 8 carpals, but I will be having only 7 tarsals. So 7 into 2 makes 14. Now metatarsal is similar. I have 5 metacarpal. I will be having 5 metatarsal also. So 5 into 2 makes 10. And phalanx is also similar. I have 3 phalanx in each finger except for the great toe. In great toe, I will be having only 2. So 4 into 3, 12. 12 plus 2, 14. 14 into 2, 18. Sorry, 14 into 2, 28. So again, when I add it up, 2 plus 2 plus 2 plus 2. That is 8. 8 plus 14 is 22. 22 plus 10 is 32. 32 plus 28 again gives me 60. So totally I have 60 plus 60, 120. 120 plus 4, 124. 124 plus 2, 126. So that's make my appendicular skeleton. So this is how our axial and appendicular skeleton is played. So I know that you guys know this. You guys have already studied about this in locomotion movement. But since I have detailed everything about muscles, not everything, the basics about muscle, the basics about blood vessels, the basics about nerves, the basic about lymph vessels, I also need to discuss the basic about the skeletal system also. So I hope it's just a revision for you, just a brushing up for you. I hope it's clear. So 126 plus 8. 126 plus 80. Of those 126, 6 is girdle bones. Of that 4 is pectoral girdle, 2 is pelvic girdle. And the remaining 120, 13 upper limb, 13 lower limb. Each bone we have discussed. Coming to axial skeleton, we have the skull and associated, we have total 29 bones. In the thoracic cage, we have 25 bones. And in the vertebral column, we have total 26 bones, which makes a sum of 80. I hope it's clear. Now, just see this figure. That means this figure we have described or discussed each separate bone in the human body. But I am not going to discuss it now because this is not the base. We are only discussing the basics here. This thing you will be learning in your anatomy proper class. In the next 1 year, we will be learning the name of each and every one of these bones. A basic bone study we have discussed. Now when you come to detailed study, you will going to learn this. Okay, you are going to learn the name of each and every bone. So we are not going to discuss. I just wanted to show this figure. Okay.